Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Diane Allen. How are you today, Diane?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me, Desiree.
I am honored to have you on the show, and I have so been looking forward to this conversation since I first watched your TEDx talk. And Diane, you are so accomplished. You are a speaker. As I mentioned, you have given a TEDx talk. You are a flow state thought leader. You are a trained professional violinist. You're a coach. You are an author. You've been featured on so many fantastic networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. It goes on and on. And I am thrilled that you are here today to share your knowledge and this information with us. Thank you again for joining us.
This is my idea of fun.
I love it. Well, so I always love to ask my guests to share how this journey began and what led to this all coming to be for you. So take it away.
There are so many journeys in life. Should we go through the flow state lens?
Sure.
So, when a musician gets into the music, they're basically in their flow state. And if you were let's say you were at a concert and the musicians were not in the music, right? They were just kind of going through the motions, playing the right notes at the right time, doing the right thing, but just not getting into it. So as a professional violinist and throughout all my training, that is a requirement, right? You have to get into the music because the audience is expecting a transformational experience. And so if you're just playing the notes, they're not going to get that. It's that other piece, which is, like I said, when a musician gets into the music, they're getting into their flow state. Yeah, it started out where I would have great moments of getting into flow and doing it all in the practice room. But put me under pressure and I would pretty much crumble and it wouldn't happen. So I think my first scar would be in high school. Typical place, right? To have those experiences that scar you for life. So I was at a youth orchestra audition and I'm in the warm-up room. It's a classroom, right? Think tile floor, desks with the chairs attached, lots of metal and hard surfaces. And I put my violin case on one of these desks and it takes a slow slide off, drop my violin, lands on its top, and all of the pieces just go exploding in all different directions. It did not break. There's a lot of pieces that aren't glued in so the pressure release was just, they went flying off. So I scrambled together, I reassembled the violin, got it together, and then they call my name, Diane Allen, right? Your turn. And at that point, I did not play my best. I didn't get to warm up. The violin sounded terrible. It was just, a disaster. So, that I went through the motions, right? For that audition. Anyways, somehow I still got in, but I was sitting last chair of the section, which is like being picked last for dodgeball, right? Humiliating. So, it took a while to shake that off. Throughout, I did get into college. I did study really hard. I practiced really hard. I had the full-on New York City violin, training at the Manhattan School of Music. And it was a real deal. And I was fine, except for when I had to do juries, which was basically you would go and perform at the end of a semester for all of the violin faculty. And so there was a history of this already in my life. Fast forward, at this point, I'm doing a lot of teaching, which I love doing. And I'm playing in a lot of freelance orchestras, still wanting to have the job of my dreams. And it was an advertisement for a violin teaching job in Central Oregon. I live in Bend, Oregon. And I kept like for 3 years in a row, I kept seeing this ad, and I was 8 months pregnant, trying to figure out what to do. My husband was kind of at a standstill, like, "What do we do?" We knew that we had to shift because we're about to have a baby. And so I took that audition. They actually auditioned me. It was a full day, and it was right after I had given birth to my son. So he was 6 weeks old when we came out to Oregon, and I had nothing to lose. At that point, I hadn't touched the violin, like, I had hardly practiced. I had a newborn, right? It was like I kinda threw caution to the wind, and wouldn't you know it, total flow state the entire day. It was, like, magical. I played the best I ever played. I taught students in front of an audience. Everything I said was, like, ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue. It was just magical. And shortly after we moved, I was then hired to become the lead violinist, the concertmaster of the Central Oregon Symphony. And for those of you who are watching the video, I have a picture. This is looking at the orchestra I played in from the top down, where you can see everyone. We put a little spotlight on me just to show, highlight that I'm second in command to the conductor. And so in this role, I had to be at my best. I had to get into the music because however well or poorly I did would ripple effect throughout the orchestra. Also the audience, because a big part of this role as being the concertmaster is also it's kind of like a liaison to the audience as well. There's a lot of formalities in classical music. Anyways, I was able to get into the music pretty reliably. It became routine when it was extraordinary. I would show up. Didn't matter if my son was up all night because he was a toddler and sick and who knows, all that kind of stuff that happens when you're a mom, and I could still get into that chair. It became routine and turn it on until a good, I wanna say, almost 14 years later or so. One of the jobs that I would do for this orchestra was I would do outreach concerts. So I would take a small group of musicians and we would go and perform community outreach concerts. And so I always loved public speaking. And I had this wild idea. It's like, why don't I do the public speaking before we perform? And I could do the two things that I love doing. And so I had a great time, gave the pre-concert lectures, super fun. Turn around, sit down, literally without any transition in between. I just turn around, sit down, give a big cue for the music to start. And for some reason, my elbows were frozen. Like they felt like they couldn't move. And I was having like a whole kind of like going through the motions experience for the first time in a long time. And my colleagues were looking at me over the music stands, like with worried eyes, like, "Where's Diane? We can hardly hear you." And in my mind, I'm thinking, just keep moving, just keep moving. And it only took me about a minute to regain the full use of my arms, but I could not get into the music that day. So it freaked me out, something that I took for granted. And literally, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done this here who's listening, but after another humiliating experience, I was sitting on the couch at night feeling humiliated, and I was grilling myself with questions. And that was the night that I reverse engineered how I get into flow. And those are the steps that I now teach others to do the same. So that's the back end of the story.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us and the detail of kind of how this came to be and this topic that you now teach and have written a book on. And we will absolutely get into that in a little bit. But I love that you shared experience, even though we may not all have had the orchestra experience per se, we have all had experiences where we are in a place, we have to maybe give a speech, and it just all falls apart. And we're just like, what the heck just happened? And then
Right.
that reflecting back on that experience, so many of us just beat ourselves up and we just say the most horrible things to ourselves.
Yes.
And so I think many of us can understand that experience from that perspective. But so tell us then, you talked a little bit about the flow state. And so let's get into that. And so
Mhm.
tell us, how do you define flow and what does that mean exactly?
I really need to react to what you just said, and then I'll tell you about flow. 75%, I don't know how they figured this out, but 75% of people do have fear of public speaking because of that potential of being humiliated in front of other people. And that could be whether you're in front of a large crowd or at a job interview or just in a meeting, right? We all have that experience. And there's a lot of people who say, I just want to speak from the heart. And so I actually have a chunk just on this topic in my book because it is so universal that so many people fear public speaking. And when people say that, I appreciate that because it shows to me that they understand that being in flow is like almost feels like it's unscripted and then it comes naturally and it comes from a high place. And so a lot of people will say, I am afraid to prepare. I'm going to jinx it.
Mm.
And but then if you don't prepare and you try to speak from the heart without a lot of the kind of routine experience that I had with getting into flow, it's like you might rock it, but maybe you have amnesia about it because your fight or flight response is way overly triggered. So basically everything we're going to be talking about today is like how can you figure out how you can flourish in these high pressure moments? Because violin is a high precision instrument under high pressure. And obviously, I had a leadership role. Everything is going to apply to that. So, definition of flow state. It is not a mindset, is go with the flow. The flow state is actually, there's neuroscience behind it. It falls under the umbrella of positive psychology. Positive psychology is all about taking a look at what's working well, reverse engineering that so you can create more of that in your life. And so the Martin Seligman is the psychologist who basically coined the term flow state. And he talked about people's signature strengths, being in your signature strengths as one of those key pockets of knowledge, right? Your own signature strength of tapping into being your best self. But then the psychologist who did the most thorough research into flow, his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And his definition of flow is an optimal state of mind when you feel your best and you perform your best. I like to talk about it as if it's like your genius and your heart become one. So if you think, how could you get into whatever it is in your life, like a musician gets into the music, that's what we're talking about. So it's, to me, it's like at the intersection of intellect and heart, right? It's all of us. It's a holistic piece of it. I shouldn't say piece of it. It's a holistic thing. Okay, so the neuroscience of flow. There's a cocktail of peak performance hormones that are released that create brain waves conducive to the flow state. The neocortex amps up, dramatically increasing learning speed. And the prefrontal cortex temporarily shuts down. And this explains why we lose a sense of time and a sense of ourselves, because what lives in the prefrontal cortex is your inner critic. So basically, that gets silenced and it opens you up. So a lot of people, for example, when you take a shower, when people have shower moments and all these ideas are just pouring in, right? Theoretically, that is not getting into your flow state. But in the shower, your prefrontal cortex does temporarily shut down. It is the same, it has the same thing that happens when you're in flow. So let me tell you what those peak performance hormones are. There's anandamide, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And because of this, we experience euphoria. We experience motivation, peak performance, and happiness, often all at the same time. And there's people who get addicted to it. If you think about people who are in sports and constantly doing high risk things, there is an element of that. And then there's also an element in the gaming industry. The gaming industry knows how to design the games to keep you being challenged and having you rise to the occasion. And you do get into flow during those gaming experiences. And so there is like a little bit of a risk, but I'm all about grounded in how do you get into flow in your everyday life and work in a way that's not addictive and it's in a way that's really satisfying and fulfilling. So that's some of the definition, the positive psychology and the neuroscience of flow. And if y'all are trying to take notes, don't worry, I got all the notes for you already written down, so you can just relax and I'll make sure we get them to you later.
Perfect. Diane, that was fantastic, though. Going into that level of detail and sharing that with us is just tremendous. I love the point about you, what you are describing and what you are sharing and teaching is from a place that sounds healthy. versus that addictive level, like you just described with gaming.
Mhm.
And so maybe share a little bit about how we can get into that flow in a way that's grounded, like you said,
Yeah.
a- and we can apply it to our everyday life.
Yeah, definitely. To speak first to that groundedness feeling that you have when you're in flow, as well as just unlocking everything that there's a lot of potential. A lot of times you do better than you think you can when you're in
Mhm.
flow. And that's like really expansive to experience that. But, anyways, I do want to reference for those of you who are Adam Grant people that you love following him and his work. He's an organizational psychologist. And there he wrote an article in the New York Times and gave a TED talk on this very topic. And he talked about the mental health spectrum and how halfway between depression and flourishing, there's this midway point where you're fine, but you're not fine. You're functional, but you can't get motivated and you're just kind of blah. And this was the predominant emotion about a year into the pandemic. And he said, "Look, this is where we are." And I think a lot of people found relief. It's like, okay, I'm not losing my mind. This is actually where I'm at. But what most people don't remember is the second half of his article, which he gives the antidote. How do you go from languishing to flourishing? And it's specifically to get into your flow state. So, what I want to do is I want to talk about how do you know when you're in a flow? Like, what are the key indicators? And then once we go through that, we're going to do an experience together. Okay. So, Desiree, let me ask you, have you ever done something that where you lost all track of time because you were just loving what you were doing? Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did, distance running for a long time, and so, yeah, absolutely. There were points where it was horrible and I wanted it to end, but then there were points when it felt like the most amazing thing on earth, and I could just run forever and ever.
Oh, I love that. And then you were nodding your head earlier, ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue, right? That's like those shower moments, right? So you've had that. Losing a sense of self is another key indicator. And losing a sense of self, it's like, what does that mean? It actually feels like you're completely uninhibited and fearless.
Mhm.
So have you had experiences like that
Well, yeah, again, in the
in
running,
the running?
when you're
That's
yeah,
your
when you're doing something like this where it's a distance that's a long distance,
uh
you just become like you almost feel invincible
yeah.
because if you can get through that, you can just about accomplish anything.
I love that word invincible that you just used. Oh, yeah. Gosh, because that does feel a lot like flow in some ways. Yes. I hadn't connected that one before. So thanks for that gift. Okay. So we had losing sense of time, losing sense of self, ideas and insights coming in from out of the blue, things coming together with the sense of ease, like when you get more done in 30 minutes than you had in the last 3 days. You've had those moments. And then instead of being in a negative feedback loop, so a negative feedback loop is when you're having to use perhaps willpower or
Mm,
discipline to do the hard work. Our culture really honors that. I don't know why, because the opposite of that is being in a positive feedback loop where you're so into your work that it's so rewarding, it refuels you. And there's no reason why you can't be living throughout your day in that kind of juicy place. And then, like Adam Grant said, you are experiencing more meaning, joy, and fulfillment in your work. So these are in your life. And so these are the key indicators when you're in flow. And you really need to start by recognizing when you're in flow in order to be able to use that positive psychology where you reverse engineer it to figure out how you can get into flow.
got it. Got it. So it sounds like you said reverse engineer it. So when you're experiencing it, you have to sort of reflect on what was going on in and around that experience and how do I replicate it almost.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do my 3-step flow strategy system right now because you just queued it up. So there are 3 questions: where, what, and why. And I want to, in addition, so Desiree, you specifically mentioned running. I'm curious, have you experienced flow in other areas of your life?
Sure. I write in my journal. And so there's times when the words just seem to pour out onto the paper. I don't know where they're coming from. It just happens.
Mm-hmm. Any other places?
Let's see.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking perhaps there has been times washing the dishes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. So the first question is, so what we just did was Desiree just located 3 different places. Where is the first question? Where do you get into the flow state the most? In the kitchen washing dishes, writing, wherever, you do your journaling, and then when you did your distance running. Do you still run?
I do, but it's much shorter distances now.
Yeah. So maybe we could figure out a way for you to still get into that space that you did with the long distance in the short. That would be my challenge for you. Like, how can we have the same juiciness in your short runs? Okay, so your first step is to basically locate where are you when you get into the flow state the most, and you use those key indicators. Like, how do you know when you're in flow, right? So you have to know when you're in flow in order to be able to locate where you are. All right, I'm overstating the obvious, but I'm a teacher. I can't help it. Okay, what is the second question? What are you doing? This is a two-part question. It seems to me that your running is the most vivid one. So where you are is out running.
Yeah.
That could be anywhere, but where you are is out there running. Do you run inside at all?
No, I don't.
All
It's all
outdoors.
outside.
Okay, that's a key piece too, because environment can really have a big impact
Mhm.
on whether you get into flow or not. So what are you doing? Obviously, you're running. Okay, that's what you're doing on the outside. I play the violin. That's what I'm doing on the outside. What are you doing on the inside? So I'll give you a couple examples. As a violinist, my friends would say, "Well, hey, Diane, what we're doing on the inside, while we're creating the music." And I totally get that, but it doesn't really resonate with me. When I was sitting on the couch that night, like trying to figure out how I get into flow, I realized that it feels like sharing. And I'm
Mm.
sharing the message, I'm sharing the experience. And then I thought, you know what? I was fortunate enough to read out loud to my son until he was 13. And I realized I was sharing the message and sharing the experience. It feels the same. If somebody says, "What do you want for your birthday?" I'm like, it's never a gift. It's like, let's go do something together. So, what I'm doing on the inside is sharing. So, did that give you an idea of what help you to reflect on what you're doing on the inside when you're where you are is out running, what you're doing is running, and what are you doing on the inside?
Yeah, it does a little bit. And I just have to say that a lot of the times, being that it was outdoors, I was running trails on those really long distances. So super into the nature, right? I mean, there's the trees are all around me, the noise of the forest, wherever we happen to be training at that time. And so a lot of it was just totally getting out of my head and observing the nature around me.
Observing the nature around me.
Yeah.
Does that sound like what you're doing on the inside?
Oh, for sure.
Cool. It's interesting because Cheek Sent Me Heidi's book on flow does have a whole section about how people get into flow when they're out in nature. And like where I live, I also live where there's easy access to forests and streams and beautiful places. So I totally get that. So what you're doing on the inside is observing nature. And the third question is why? We've heard that question so many times. I just want to define it the way I'm thinking about it. So when we're looking at why, we're looking at those, highest of values that we have that actually are so much greater than ourselves, like peace, freedom, joy, right? Love. It could be expansion, self actualization, right? Any of those. So when you think about when there you are, you're in this blissful state, you're out running, you are observing everything around you and soaking all that in. Why is that so meaningful?
Mm. Well, you just recognize the beauty of nature and the miraculousness of it. Yeah.
That word, okay. What was the other one? Invincible and miraculousness, like amazing word choices. And these are so unique to everybody. I will tell you, I've done this a zillion times, but nobody has ever pulled those 2 words out. And I'm just like, it really
Oh.
hones in. This is what I'm saying. It's like, I believe that this process really hones in on what makes people tick.
Mm.
So the 2 parts of flow strategy, and I have a flow strategy worksheet too that I have available for people. So what you're doing on the inside is your most compelling internal self motivator. And when you know what that is, when you define that, you now own it because you
Mm.
can conjure it up. And then why it's so meaningful is external self-motivator, because you're reaching for those things that are so beyond you. That miraculousness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so beyond us. And these are the two pieces that will help you to get into flow. On your short runs, I would recommend that before you go, that you literally put your hands on your heart. There's 40,000 neurons in our heart. And close your eyes and recreate the memory of those times when you got into that state on your long runs before you start your short run, and
Mhm.
see if that is able to trigger it.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Thank you for that suggestion. I will for sure try that. And we've changed locations, meaning we've moved fairly recently. So I'm not in the same area to have access to those streams and trails and forests. However, I now have the desert landscape and the mountainous areas in Arizona. So
Okay.
I've got a whole different now landscape to observe and enjoy the miraculousness of, because it is also miraculous in its difference, right?
Yeah.
Because it is so far from where I was before, but I love it. So I'm excited for that. Thank you, Diane.
There's a twist to this. I'll give you an example. So I told you, oh, so I didn't finish my flow strategy. I told you that when I'm performing violin, what I do on the inside is sharing the message, sharing the experience. But you have to keep in mind, I played the big orchestra, big audiences. And there was this thing, the why was like when I would share, it would be creating this environment where you'd have a lot of people in one space together being unified through the
Mhm.
music. And so that concept of unity, like just that I would literally like, especially audience sing-alongs, Desiree, it was ridiculous because I would have the choir would be behind the orchestra, then you'd have the orchestra, then the house lights would be up, right? The audience would be singing. I would uncontrollably cry, and I would have to, like, turn my head so that the tears would not get on my violin and stain the finish, like, it was ridiculous, in a good way, right? Speaker, okay, the violin came first, the speaking came second. I had to go networking, and I had no idea how to do that. In the music world, I did not really need to do that. Everything was word of mouth for me in the music world. I so, like, here I was, like, in my 40s, going networking. I had no idea how to do it, and there's all these people standing in circles, and I was like, "What is this? Middle school all over again? Like, cliques?" I was like, "What the heck?" I'm, like, frustrated, I'm in the moment, I'm like, "Okay," sometimes a light bulb or a lightning bolt comes in, and I thought, "Alright, what if you just listen, and what if you just notice if you have a story that correlates to what people are talking about, and then you have to kinda butt in a little bit, but just tell the story." And here's what happened, there were 3 things that happened. So the first thing is I felt like myself. Second thing is, you know how when one person tells a story, then somebody's like, "Oh, well, they have a story," and then somebody else has a story. So it actually propelled the conversations rather than how networking is like, "What do you do? What do you do?" And then it's like, "Where do you go from here?" So the story generation was really fun. And like the first time I did that, I'm not kidding, I ran out of business cards at night. So I realized, wait a minute. Sharing the story, sharing the experience. It's just like when I was reading out loud. It's just like when I'm performing music. And I realized, wait a minute, I have sharing these stories with strangers, it's unifying, right? You're connecting. So I realized I have a through line in my life of this flow strategy, but I had no idea that I could use it to help me when I'm outside of my comfort zone. I stumbled on it. So when I think about your running experience, where else could you be where you could use this observing what's around you and looking for the miraculousness of it? Can you think of other
Mhm.
environments that may be helpful?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like you just talked about, networking events and things like that. I mean, I've gone to quite a few myself. I've gone with my husband to events, and there's times when it's easy to pop into a conversation and just join in. And then there's times when you are on the outside and you don't know anybody else there. And how do you break into that? So I absolutely can see myself using these strategies that you just shared and helping me figure out how I can take the experiences that I've had and apply it. Yeah, I love it.
So you're able to repurpose.
Yeah.
Another twist is you can have a lot of different flow strategies. I've got one for gardening, right? Way different. I have one for writing music, which is way different than performing music. So it's not like you have only one, but I do believe that each one does shine a light on what people might say, what's your secret sauce or what makes you tick or what's that, I like to say, genius inside you.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Good stuff, Diane. Thank you so much. I just I've gotten so much from this conversation, and I hope the listeners have put themselves in my place as they're listening to this and maybe thought through some of these things because I just love it. And I think that we can apply this in so many areas of our life, and it's good stuff. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about maybe how this has impacted your mental health?
Huh.
Because you talked briefly about the pandemic, and this really has done a number on a lot of us,
Yes.
whole experience. And so, as we're beginning to come out of it these last couple of years, a lot of us have had been impacted
Yeah.
in many serious ways. And so, how can this help us with our mental health?
Yeah. Okay. Um, Interruptions are the number one killer of flow,
Mm,
whether they're small interruptions or big interruptions. And so that's why it's helpful to have some strategies so that you can get back on the bandwagon. In fact, I made a gift that goes, anyways, it's a door hanger that says, "Do not disturb. I'm in my flow." Anyways, so when I go to speaking engagements, I can give that out to people. But there's all kinds of interruptions and flow or no flow. Will challenges get in your way? Well, yeah, of course they will. And as when I was sitting in the orchestra, it was just an environment where I would get there and it would just click in until the day that I was sitting on stage playing a Beethoven symphony and I was completely numb. Like no emotion at all. And I was unable to feel anything because my son was at the height of his teenage rebellion. He was also deeply depressed, and
mm,
he was 18, and he was pulling the adult card. So it was a very scary time because I could not help him. He would not let me in, or my husband, right? At the same time, my mom had Alzheimer's.
mm,
And that's when I was sitting on the stage, feeling completely numb. Huge interruptions, right? I thought that while I was my mom was very clear, put me in a home, don't try to take care of me, but I still had to take care of her, right? And I thought that during that time that putting flow on the back burner was the right thing to do
mm,
because I do think that a lot of us feel guilty when we're in such bliss, like we're thriving and in that positive feedback loop when there's suffering going around you, right? So I got to the point where I was so confused. I asked for leave, a year's leave from the orchestra. I took that. A year later, I still hadn't figured it out. And I thought, okay,
mm,
maybe I'm just done with the violin. I sold it, sold my gorgeous antique violin. I mean, this instrument was like my musical voice that I had for years, right? I sold it. Sold my entire music collection. I focused on public speaking, which I also love doing. And it wasn't until quite a few years later, my son, I'll get to him in a second, but my mom had passed away. And I was sitting at it was a film festival. There was a documentary about a group of counterculture artists. And they were questioning everything like who's to say this is art? Who's to say this is not art? Who's to say this art's valuable? This is art is not valuable. They were also wanting to run their own business and build their own museum. And they're like, who's to say we have to have leaders? Why can't
mm,
we all be equal? Like they were questioning everything. And I found it riveting and I couldn't sleep that night. For some reason, I could feel the power of the violin coming back into my life.
mm,
So when the first time I tried to combine speaking with playing the violin was a disaster, but it did trigger me to figure out my flow strategy. But after that, I was like, these two worlds will never collide. Never, right? So, anyways, that morning, I'm like, okay, I got to borrow a violin. My friend Janet comes over. I play a little Bach. No, played a pop tune. Yes. Like, Desiree, it took me 10 minutes to figure out I wasn't done with the violin. I was done with classical music.
Uh,
It's just that all happened at the same time as the difficulties with my mom and my son, right? So I was like, okay. Week later, I borrowed an electric violin. 6 weeks later, I'm already writing my own music and I'm combining it with the speaking. And everyone, all my friends were like, Diane, can you not combine the speaking with the violin? I'm like, oh, no. Soon as it happened, that's when the career took off. Right. So I am back into my zone, right? A lot of people call it being in your zone, and look at the impact it has, right? The
mm,
speaking alone wasn't working. The violin got to a standstill. But the thing is that the whole violin career was very driven. Like, I got to train, I got to take auditions, I got to get this, right? But this process was the opposite. It was like, where am I going? I call it the giant suck forward. I felt like something was pulling me forward into this area that I had never envisioned for myself, playing the violin and speaking and combining it, right? Playing electric, writing my own music? Heck no, that was never in the plan. So, yes, we all have some small and some big interruptions in our life. And whether or not you could see the path, I believe that there really is always an undercurrent of possibilities and new ways to evolve. And what we didn't know about my son is that, it was Father's Day right after he graduated high school, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. Bye, mom. Bye, dad. Moving out. And he went up to a job that he had for the summer at river raft guiding. And then when that ended, he went straight to the municipal airport and signed up for pilot lessons. And I have never seen him. That was how many years ago? 9 years ago. I have never seen him so happy, so motivated, so focused. And he bypassed college completely. He just went straight for what he wanted. And we didn't know that he was even going to head in that direction. And when your kids are like at that scary place and you know they could take one road or the other, I cannot tell you what a relief to see him so engaged in his work. And just like playing the violin, flying is a high precision instrument, and having that passion and being in his excellence is a requirement. And he does follow in his parents' footsteps. We're both musicians. We both raised him getting into our flow states. So there you have it.
oh, wow. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Diane. Tremendous information there. And, I think that we maybe can't see ourselves in that particular position, but we have all had challenges and we have what a myriad of challenges, right? It could be across the spectrum and interruptions as well. And so thank you for it was cute, the door hanger that you had. I'm in my flow state. I love that idea. Or even just taping the note to your door if you don't have a door hanger. I'm in my flow state. I'm working, right? Is what you're saying. I'm in the middle of something. Please don't interrupt me. And so, what a great suggestion for somebody who really needs to focus. And then, in terms of the mental health portion of it, and how when we can use it as an opportunity to find some levity in the moments that are difficult, and I love that you shared about where we sort of feel guilty if we are finding happiness or joy in tough situations when other people are struggling. Yeah, I think so many people can relate to that. And you feel like, I shouldn't be happy right now. I shouldn't be enjoying life because they're going through this. I should be on this level with them. But that really doesn't serve either of us, right? I mean, being in that happier state, in that more joyful state makes a difference, not just in our lives, but their lives, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
The hospice care providers were unbelievable. And
Mm.
I gave back afterwards. I spoke at a number of their events and I did some leadership training there. And I was talking to this one woman and she said, I've been caregiving for 35 years. I don't even know who I am anymore. And I
Mm.
think a lot of women do that kind of self-sacrifice. I know that a lot of us, we're kind of, there's a culture of that, but it's like, I can't imagine not having a home base, right? Which is what that woman didn't have. And there's so many different ways to find your home base. This is one of them, right? Being in your flow state is one of many, but yeah.
Great stuff, Diane. So I want to switch gears just a little bit. You mentioned before that you have some worksheets that you want to share, and I absolutely want to hear about that. But I also want for you to share with us now more information about your highly anticipated upcoming book, which I am so looking forward to getting my hands on. And that is expected to come out around September 15, 16, 17, sometime
17th.
in that window.
Yeah.
Yes. So please tell the listeners and what they can expect to find if they were to pick that out.
Yeah. So let me tell you about the gift I have. It's basically a link that's going to take you to a web page that has all of the notes that are going to summarize what we talked about today. It will also have other things that we didn't have the time to talk about today. And it's all like an easy to read outline format, just kind of like bullet points. There's also a couple of videos on there that will also help to support that information. So that link is tinyurl.com/flowstategift. So it's tinyurl.com/flowstategift. No spaces there. And that's just my gift for you. The second thing is the book, Flow, Unlock Your Genius, Love What You Do is the title. And it will be available on Amazon on September 17th. I will make sure that we have the link down in the show notes. I don't know when we'll be airing this, but we do have a special between the 17th and the 22nd through the end of the 22nd of September in the year 2024. We're having a sale of my book for $199 just to kind of get the ball rolling. And if you want to grab it, that would be a great time to do it. So we'll make sure we have all those links for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I will detail all of that information in the show notes for the listeners for sure. And yes, your episode is actually going to be airing right in that same window of time. So if you're listening real time, this will be coming out at the same time your book. So absolutely pick up Diane's book in this window because you're going to get it for a bargain, I think, with it's all this information. And you're absolutely right. We barely touched on the full contingent of information that you have that you share. And so I wish we could continue on with this conversation. It's been such a delight. But real quick, I know you also have a YouTube channel. So would you tell us really quickly about that and what the listeners might be able to find if they check that out?
So my YouTube channel is focused on my speaking career. So I do a lot of keynote speaking. I perform the violin when I speak, and you will find a lot of videos, examples of that, as well as some content.
Excellent. I'll make sure that the YouTube details are there so that the listeners can easily find it. And I see your gorgeous violin behind you. And so for those who are watching on YouTube, you will see it as well. For the listeners, Diane, would you like to take a moment and share just a little bit of your amazing musical skill with us? That would be phenomenal.
Yeah, we'll close it out with some music.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that. Thank you so much, Desiree, for having me here. I super appreciate it. I'm going to say goodbye now because I have to turn off my mic to play the violin. And very grateful for all of you who are listening. And I look forward to meeting y'all. If you ever want to reach out, let me know.
Okay, well, before you disconnect, Diane, let's have you share where listeners can find you. You share the tiny URL. Is there all of your social links would be found there?
You'll find me at Diane Allen Speaker is for LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that's in the show notes as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Ready?
Yeah.
Awesome.
And wonderful. Thank you so much, Diane. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing your beautiful music with us today and all of your knowledge and wisdom. Thank you. It has been an honor, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.